I remember as a child hearing this name, had no idea how important this woman really was. And so since having found out a lot more about Mona Douglas, when I read that you had quite a strong connection with her, I was so excited, I have to say. Annie, tell us about how you actually met her in the first place.
Well, it was down to Mum and Dad, and it was also down to Leslie Quilliam, the teacher again, who had a word with Mum and Dad and mentioned that he thought I was very interested in, or would be very interested to meet Mona Douglas, because she had what they called a youth group in town at the time. It sounded a bit, youth group in town sounded a bit dodgy, but anyway, I expressed an interest, and my sister Jenny too, and we were brought down basically every Saturday night from I suppose I was about 7 till I was about 17. I'd be going to the back of Mount Havelock, and along with a few other children and youths, and we would be learning Manx songs and some dancing, even fencing at one point. And as I got older, I got sort of dragged into different aspects of culture, if you like, dialect plays and all sorts of things, which didn't just involve the children of Eglach Fannin, but involved other people who were interested both in the sort of preservation of dialect and sort of Manx traditions, and also the language. So I ended up coming across an awful lot of very influential people who indeed did influence me very strongly at I suppose a time when I was very open to it all. So I was very lucky. But Mona Douglas was was a sort of constant through my life, really, and still is in various ways.
And we were just saying off air there how, because I mentioned to you that, like I said, I knew her as a child, knew of her as a child, had no idea about the importance of her. And you said, well, actually, that was pretty much the case when she was alive as well. Most people just had no idea how crucial the work she was doing was.
Yeah, she was a very determined lady, and she didn't. She saw where she wanted to go, and she appeared to take no notice of the difficulties that everybody else would see. This is the right thing to do. This is what we'll do. And she was sort of out of her time, really. The things she was interested in at the time and promoting and knew about were things that really I think most people thought had fizzled out before or during the First World War. And they seemed a bit old-fashioned and strange and backward looking, if you like, and Mona had a sort of mystical side to her as well, which I think might have caused huge embarrassment to the practical people of the 20th century. So she was a little bit out on a limb, but she did her own thing, and she kept doing it all her life, and she saw the world in a different way than most people. But I was impressed by the sort of singularity of her vision, and you should do what feels right. And I think I've sort of tried in a way to follow in not exactly her footsteps, because we wouldn't agree on lots of things, but that idea you should follow what feels right, and your instinct on these things is not a bad way to be.
And it absolutely sort of proves how important those connections are with people, and how you can have, even a brief encounter with someone and it can influence the rest of your life, really. And actually what her work and what you've continued to do since is influencing all of our lives, because you see it around us now, don't you? You can see the effect of it.
I think she would be delighted to see all the interest in Manx culture that's going on at all levels now. It's very respectable, almost too respectable, some might say. But, it's gone from being a sort of very, very small minority to quite a healthy minority now, I think. I don't think she'd have been surprised, though. She thought that everything had its time, I think, and it probably does, yes.
And yeah, as everything had its time, but you described when you sent in your information, you were saying that she did what she did in spite of the indifference and hostility of the times that she was in.
Yes.
So there was quite a backlash, was there?
I think... she didn't always help herself. I think some people were horrified, where people would be go on record of having seen fairies here, there and everywhere. It just sort of confounded the images of, airy fairy woman once, intellectually sort of lacking, ridiculously imaginative, all the things that would be used sometimes against women, actually. I think, particularly in the past, not so much these days, but I do feel she was she was, in a way, at a disadvantage of being female at a time when most of the movers and shakers in the Manx world, the people who were out researching the Manx language and this sort of thing, were all male. And they were all very, I have huge respect for them as individuals, but, there was this sort of strange woman on the periphery doing her own thing, which sort of involved songs and things that people didn't perhaps feel were quite as important as they would do now. And she was very creative, and she didn't really see a gap between what you collect and what you find and what you create yourself. So, as a folklore collector, she's probably pretty desperately bad because, your own imagination and your own experience went straight into it. But I identify with that very strongly. And I think it's just the mark of being a really creative person in the right environment. So.
And this talk of Mona and that time in your life as well leads us into your next piece of music, which is a beautiful piece. Tell us about The Secret Island.
Yes, Mona was a poet, and I didn't really realise this until perhaps the last 30 years or so. And I've come across some of her writings which have not been published or hadn't been published for a very, very long time. And one of the longer poems known as The Secret Island, and part of this has been beautifully arranged and sung by Marlene, and I think Charles Gard, another great friend of Mona, is playing the harp there. And I think it's a beautiful piece, and it gives it gives the words the beauty that they have in them too,